Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD, pro physique athlete. Today I'm going to be giving you a full guide on how to lose fat. This is going to be a full step-by-step guide that will take you through the process of shedding weight, whether it's your first time or you're a fitness model prepping for a photo shoot. I actually think natural bodybuilders are some of the best people to look for fat loss advice because it's basically our sport to get unreasonably shredded for stage. This past year, I got shredded twice, winning my pro card in natural men's physique, and then going on to compete in WNBF Worlds. And I've applied the knowledge we have from science into actual practice to get very lean while maintaining all of my muscle mass. As you've realized, fat loss is a pretty painful process. And after watching this video, you're gonna know how to do it as efficiently and painlessly as possible. Understanding how to lose fat is going to be really important for any bodybuilder who ultimately wants to build a good physique. Ultimately, the process of bulking and cutting is what's going to give you your best results. This is because at a more advanced level, it becomes very difficult to put on muscle unless you're in a calorie surplus. When you're bulking beyond the beginner stage, when you can recomp, it becomes very difficult to put on muscle without putting on additional fat. As that fat builds up, eventually you're going to have to take periods of fat loss to strip it off. The key is understanding how to lose fat properly without losing muscle or continuing to build muscle. And that's another point I want to emphasize is that if you are able to recomp, you will still be able to recomp in a deficit. And if you're able to recomp when you're in a deficit, it's something that's just going to happen. You'll continue to build muscle and you'll end up reaching your end goal faster. So if you're above about 15% body fat for men or above 25% for women, I would recommend getting into a calorie deficit. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about when it comes to fat loss, and this is the most important thing, is creating a calorie deficit. You need to be in a calorie deficit to lose weight. If you're not losing weight, it means you're not in a calorie deficit. A calorie deficit is basically when calories out is greater than calories in. Now, people will recommend fancy calculators online to come up with a calorie intake for you based on a bunch of variables, but I actually wouldn't recommend this strategy because a lot of these calculators will give you the wrong answers. The truest and easiest way to figure out your calorie intake is to work backwards from scale weight changes. So I recommend quantifying the amount of deficit you want to aim for in terms of rate of loss. So I recommend losing weight at a rate between 0.5 to 1.5% of your body weight lost per week, or up to 2% of your body weight per week if you're obese. So for example, if you weighed 200 pounds, losing 0.5% of your body weight per week would be losing 1 pound per week, and losing 1% of your body weight per week would be 2 pounds per week. The key is when we have controlled rates of loss, it's going to be easier to sustain that deficit, and we run less of a risk of losing muscle. If you try to cut too aggressively, first of all, you're probably going to end up quitting your diet because it's going to be too hard. Plus, a harsh deficit is a very unfavorable place for muscle growth, and you may end up losing muscle. On the grand scheme of things, it's going to be harder to build muscle than it is to lose fat. So we want to make doubly sure that we don't lose muscle during our cuts. Now, if you are obese, you can lose fat at a more aggressive rate just because you have a lot of extra cushioning around, so your body isn't going to be as upset by the deficit. Now, if you are a beginner running your first fat loss phase ever, I'd recommend starting conservatively, so starting on the lower end of things. Fat loss is pretty harsh when you first start, and if you're not used to it, it's going to be difficult, and you want to make sure that you're able to actually stick to it. Consistency is king in bodybuilding, and your ability to stick to the plan is going to be your most important first step in losing weight. Okay, next steps here. Once you determine your rate of loss, you're going to use that to figure out your calorie intake. You can use the 1 pound equals 3,500 calorie rule to calculate your calorie deficit. This basically estimates that 1 pound of fat is equal to 3,500 calories. So if you want to lose 1 pound across a week, you're going to have to be in a 3,500 calorie deficit across that week. Divided over 7 days, that's a 500 calorie deficit per day. And if you want to find out your daily calorie intake, you'll find your maintenance calories and subtract that deficit. So for example, if your maintenance calories are 3,000, you subtract 500 calories per day, that gets you to 2,500 calories per day, and that will get you losing 1 pound per week. Now, how do you find maintenance calories? The best way is to actually figure out using scale weight changes. Track your calorie intake and your weight over a period of 1 to 2 weeks where your weight is actually staying stable. If your weight is stable across that period, that by definition is maintenance calories. There's no point in trying to use fancy calculators online to calculate your maintenance calories because there are going to be a lot of factors that affect it, like your daily activity, for example. Now, if your weight has not been stable during that 1 or 2 week period, you can also use the change in weight during that period to estimate your maintenance calories. So using this 3,500 calorie rule, say over the past week you actually gained a pound, that means you were in about a 3,500 calorie surplus across that week, or a 500 calorie surplus per day. Subtract 500 from your daily calorie intake and you'll have maintenance calories. Note that this still is somewhat a ballpark number because your metabolism will change a bit depending on your calorie intake. So for example, when you drop your calories, your body will tend to try and conserve energy and it may not burn as much as you expect. That's okay, we'll figure it out as we go along. So you're entering your first fat loss phase and you figured out your calorie intake. The next step is to set your macros. Now, in terms of macros, I like to go through this in a systematic way. And the first macro to look at is protein. Protein is going to be our most important nutrient as bodybuilders. So you want to set that first. And I recommend aiming for at least 0.72 to 1.0 grams per pound of body weight per day. Getting in enough protein is going to be really helpful to make sure that you maintain or continue to build muscle. The next step, once you set protein, is to minimize unnecessary fats and sugars. So I actually recommend going for a low fat approach. This is because fat sources tend to be very calorie dense. 1 gram of fat contains 9 calories compared to 4 calories per gram for carbs and protein. Plus, if you have physique goals, you are going to be training in the gym. And as an athlete, carbs are a more important macronutrient than fats. This is because they are the body's preferred energy source. Fats aren't going to be as useful to us as athletes, so I'd recommend cutting them first. Now you do need some fat to sustain your hormone production. So I'd recommend not going below 0.25 grams per pound per day, which is about 0.5 grams per kilo. Now, as you cut unnecessary fats, you're also going to want to cut out unnecessary sugar. Sugar isn't going to be helpful for us just because it contains a lot of calories, but won't keep us very full. Once you achieve step 1 and step 2, you may already be putting yourself in a calorie deficit and you might start to lose weight. If so, that's awesome, just keep at it. But if this isn't enough to get you into your calorie deficit, you'll want to reduce carbs to create that calorie deficit. And I like this setup because it gives you a stepwise system to set up your diet plan. You can actually work out your macros on paper if you know your daily calorie intake, you set your protein, you minimize your fats, you set your fat at a minimum, and then you figure out how many calories your protein and fats take out of your calories, subtract them, and what's left can be spent on carbs. Once you've set up your macros, what do you actually eat? Here are some diet modifications that you can start out with that will really help make the process easier. The first and most important thing you're going to want to do is choose low calorie density foods and make substitutions. People get stressed out if you give them a blank sheet and tell them to write out a meal plan. But it can actually be really easy if you write down what you normally eat and then make substitutions for things that have lower calorie density. Lower calorie density means you still feel the same amount of fullness, but with fewer calories. One of the easiest ways to do this is to systematically replace parts of your carb portion with vegetables. So for example, if you're having a bowl of pasta, you could replace half of that bowl of pasta with broccoli. This way you'll still be full at the end of the meal, but with fewer calories. People make the mistake of keeping all their food choices the same and just reducing portion size. This technically will work to make you lose weight because it will create the calorie deficit, but you'll end up being a lot hungrier this way, and it's gonna be harder to actually sustain that diet. The next low-hanging fruit is you're gonna cut out processed foods. Processed foods are not helpful to us when we want to lose weight because they won't keep us as full. These tend to be easier to digest, contain more calories, and tend to be really tasty and make us want to eat more. So try to cut out processed foods and replace them with whole food sources. An example of this might be taking a bakery item like muffins or bagels for breakfast and then replacing them with, say, steel-cut oats. If you find yourself struggling with hunger on a weight loss diet, I'd recommend increasing your fiber intake. This is a really easy thing to do that will help you stay more full without adding calories. To do this, aim to include more whole grain carb sources and increase your fruit and vegetable intake. And if you're ever buying anything with a nutrition label, look for the fiber content and think about choosing items with higher fiber. Now, once you get into that calorie deficit and you start losing weight, that's great. How do you continue to lose weight? At some point, you're probably going to run into a fat loss plateau. When this happens, you'll want to systematically reduce carbs to continue losing weight. So let's say you were losing weight well at 2,500 calories per day, but eventually you end up stalling. To continue losing weight, I'd recommend adjusting your calories and macros. When adjusting your calories, I recommend dropping about 100 to 300 calories per day. You'll have to try this out to see what works. So for example, if we were at 2,500 calories, we could subtract 100 calories from that to give us 2,400 calories. Then we run that new meal plan and see if we continue to lose weight. If we find that we're still stalled or we're not losing weight at the rate we'd expect, then we can increase that adjustment by another 100 calories, for example. And just like before, in order to create this calorie drop, we're going to systematically reduce some more of our carbs by swapping with low calorie density foods like vegetables. Since our protein is already set and our fats are already set at a minimum, really carbs are going to be what we're going to be taking away from. Okay, finally, let's touch on training. So what should you be doing in terms of exercise for fat loss? The most important thing is going to be resistance training. So I'd recommend getting into the gym at least 2 to 3 times per week while you're trying to lose weight. Resistance training is the most efficient form of exercise because you're going to be stimulating hypertrophy. That is, you're going to make sure that you continue to build or at least maintain muscle mass. Resistance training is more beneficial for you than cardio when it comes to fat loss, because if you can build more muscle or at least maintain your muscle, you'll end up having a better metabolism, which will help you to burn more calories. Now, cardio can be a useful tool for fat loss, but remember, losing weight is all about calories in versus calories out. Ultimately, cardio is just another way to reduce calories, and you can create a calorie deficit through diet, cardio, or both. I recommend focusing on creating a calorie deficit through primarily diet. This is because diet is going to be more predictable for you. Cardio will give diminishing returns when it comes to weight loss. Plus, cardio takes up a lot of time, and I want you to learn how to lose fat in a sustainable fashion. Now, at some point, cardio may be helpful, but we're not going to go into that in this video. You can search up my other videos on cardio. What are your best tips for losing fat? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to really go into full detail in setting up your diet optimally for fat loss, check out my book, Dr. Swole's Fat Loss and Body Recomposition Manual, where I go through the ins and outs of actually setting up everything in your nutrition and making sure everything is really optimized. If you're looking for some quick tips on fat loss, check out this video where I give you some easy pointers that you can try out today to get started. The last point here will really jumpstart your fat loss, and that is to hit the subscribe button. I'm all about giving the best science-based fitness advice. We'll see you next time.